Okay, we're connected. You may begin.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jill Flessing, and I serve as the chair of the Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2026. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Sisman,
Present.
Christina Boyd,
Present.
Lisa Carter,
Present.
Jason Griever,
Present.
Chad Jacobs, Michael James,
Present.
Charity Cosson,
Present.
Crystal Norman,
Present.
Dulcinea Rakestraw,
Present.
Judy Reeser, Zenova Williams.
Present.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye,
Present.
Leslie Allen.
Present.
Thank you. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Jill. And I think during the roll call, you read Judy Rooster's name. She is present. I'm not sure if her audio was not working or if she was muted at that time, but just wanted to make sure that you're aware she is present.
Thank you.
So I believe the only individual that I do not see is Chad Jacobs.
Chad.
Although there was an individual who connected on the conference call line. Let me quickly check and see if that individual would like to introduce themselves. So if you are on the conference call line for the meeting, would you like to announce your name?
Good morning. Thank you, David. This is Laura Shaughnessy, another board member from the BSRB, and I'm just logging in today to just observe and learn what other advisory committees are talking about. So thank you. I'll be quiet and listen well, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura. Laura Shaughnessy is the vice chair for the board. She is also the professional counseling board member for the BSRB board. So she is present on the conference call line. I'm going to read some introductory information concerning this call and this meeting being a remote meeting. I am David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment, though there are several individuals who have been approved for presentations to the committee. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconferenceability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On March 19th, 2026, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel, allowing members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And as you heard, the conference call line is active. Board member Laura Shaughnessy is on the conference call line, but no other individuals identified themselves. So if I do hear someone connect and state their name, I will let you know.
Okay. This meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. The next item on the agenda is agenda approval. The agenda was included with a number of attachments that David sent out late last week. If you've had time to review the agenda, are there any additions, corrections, or changes? If not, could I get a motion for approval?
I motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
I'll second.
There has been a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. The agenda for today's meeting has been approved. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, as you can see that this agenda is a full agenda today, and I am going to turn this item over to David to speak more fully on this topic, and Leslie.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate it. And want to welcome a lot of our invited guests today. This is a very special meeting of the BSRB's Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee. Just for some of you that are new to attending our committee meetings, the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee is a committee that assists the full board, the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. As a composite board, the BSRB regulates individuals in 7 mental health or behavioral health professions, including the profession of addiction counseling. And so this group that is meeting today meets for 2 hours, quarterly meetings, and discusses items relevant to the public protection mission of the board, and also has the authority to make recommendations back to the full BSRB board. And it's the board itself that is the combination of professional members representing those 7 professions and also public members that has authority to vote on action. So the authority of the advisory committee today is to collect information, provide an informational forum, and then to make recommendations if the advisory committee chooses to do so. And so to kind of frame the discussion for the advisory committee today, I wanted to give you a little bit of history. Part of the work of the BSRB is to make sure that members of the public receiving services are adequately protected by making sure that there are appropriate standards and to make sure that the existing law is being enforced. However, the board is also open to concepts and proposals brought forward by individuals or groups when it comes to things like developing workforce, as long as it does not go contrary to the public protection mission of the board. And so a few years back, during 2022, there was a proposal brought forward officially. The individual who came and spoke to the advisory committee at that time was Eric Thomason. He worked at the Community Health Center of Southeast Kansas, and he brought a proposal to the advisory committee at that time that was looking at potentially creating a type of student license in the addiction counseling field under the BSRB. And so he provided some testimony to the advisory committee back in 2022. The Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee for the board discussed that and made a couple recommendations to the board. The full BSRB board discussed those, and officially when they were seeking ideas for legislation for the 2023 session, they put forward a proposal in a bill that was heard by the 2023 legislature that would create a student temporary addiction counseling license. That legislation did pass in 2023 and became effective very quickly thereafter. Since July 1st, 2026, just to let you know about the student level addiction counseling license, there are currently 57 individuals who hold an active student temporary addiction counselor license. There's a handful of others that have previously held this license, and most of them, it's no longer active because they have advanced to a more permanent licensed addiction counselor license. And so that is the student temporary license, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more during the meeting today. But I wanted to provide a little bit of foundation to kind of let you know where that originated from, how long it's been in existence, and since that point, we've had individuals with a student level license. During the 2026 legislative session, there was a bill introduction that was made. This was House Bill 2506, and it was brought forward by Travis Lowe, who's going to speak to the committee a little bit later on behalf of a group called Acadia. And what the House Bill 2506 would have done would create a new type of license under the BSRB called an apprentice addiction counselor license. And at that time, the committee for the board and the board had discussions on that bill. There were some meetings of stakeholders concerning the bill itself, and ultimately there was not a consensus with the stakeholders to move forward on the bill during the legislative session, but there was agreement for the stakeholders to continue to meet to perhaps come up with a consensus alternate position and to try to come back to the legislature by July 31st of 2026. So that was what happened earlier this spring in a very condensed format. What we did say is that the BSRB has certain committees that would help this process. We do have the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee, which provides a good forum for these types of conversations. The board also discusses different things which may be helpful to request in terms of legislation. So we offered to facilitate some of this work, and that's why we have a lot of individuals who have been gracious and volunteer their time to present information to the committee today. So I referenced House Bill 2506. However, I understand the proposal that is going to be brought forward today is different than that. And so you should have a copy, and it's posted on the BSRB website, of some potential modifications to the BSRB's Student Addiction Counselor license as an alternative. Ultimately, the reason why House Bill 2506 was brought forward, and I will let the advocates kind of speak to this more themselves, as we understand it, is to address workforce needs in the behavioral health field. And so while we are all trying to work together on a consensus position, we thought it would also be a good opportunity to make sure that everyone is knowledgeable about the other positions that currently exist in the state of Kansas. And so to that aim, we invited as many of the different stakeholders as I could recall to attend the meeting today, or at least have a representative present, but also to go through some of those other types of positions that may be helpful as an alternative to representatives from Acadia. So we invited individuals from the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDADS, and there's a representative from that agency that will present information on other positions in the behavioral health field in Kansas. Additionally, there is a mental health technician program that is overseen by the Board of Nursing. So later on today, there will also be an individual from the Board of Nursing who will present information on that. So we thought this could be also a good opportunity to share information because ultimately, we do want to be helpful in terms of addressing workforce. We want this to be a good consensus approach by everyone involved. But if there is an existing program that meets the needs, that may be the best avenue to pursue. So I do want to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves before we begin. So why don't we go ahead and start with Travis Lowe and also the representatives from Acadia. And if you could just briefly introduce yourselves to the committee.
Yeah, thank you, David. My name is Travis Lowe with Braden Heiner Lowe and Associates here as a contract lobbyist capacity for Acadia Healthcare.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Donahue. I currently serve as a regional director with Acadia Healthcare, and I oversee our Wichita Comprehensive Treatment Center location here in Kansas. I am accompanied today by our regional vice president, Dan Pearson. I will pass it over to Dan to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Erin, and good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Pearson, a regional vice president with Acadia. I work with Erin and Travis and support our clinics in the Midwest and Southwest states. Thanks.
Well, thank you all. And then, as I mentioned, there are some representatives from KDADS, or the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services. Their official presentation will be at 11 because of some scheduling. And so if there are any individuals that have been able to log in so far, I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but we may have others join us closer to 11. So are there any individuals from KDADS that are already in presence?
Hi, this is Scott Engelmeyer. I'm Governmental Affairs Manager for KDADS.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, and as I mentioned, there's also representatives from the Board of Nursing that oversee the mental health technician program. So if there's any individuals from the Board of Nursing that are currently present, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself as well? Janelle, I see that you unmuted, but we're not able to hear you. I see that Andy is also present from the Board of Nursing. Maybe Andy could start, and then we'll come back to you when the audio issues are worked through. So,
Well, Good morning, everyone. I'm really honored and glad to be here. I'm Andy Martin. I'm the Public Information Officer with the Kansas State Board of Nursing. I'm kind of here to back up Janelle. Janelle is our Director of Nursing Education Compliance and works with the licensure of the mental health technicians. So we also share the same last name because we're married to each other. So it's pretty often that I get caught speaking for her when I probably shouldn't be. So
Thank you. Can
Well,
you hear me yet?
no. Yeah, Janelle, sorry, feel free to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Mhm.
Oh, great. I wasn't sure I could fix it. So yes, I am the Nursing Education Compliance Officer with the Board of Nursing. I've been with them for 8 years. I oversee all the educational programs, the nursing and LMHT, because it does fall under the Kansas Nurse Practice Act, although it does have its own, LMHT does have its own act. So we became responsible for that when it was developed in about, I think, 1973, 74.
Great. Well, thank you for attending and thank you for presenting information today.
Thank you.
And like I said, I did my best. There was a group of stakeholders that met this morning. Jason, I know that you serve as a member of the advisory committee. You also had mentioned your connection with the Kansas Association of Addiction Professionals, CAP. So I apologize for asking you to wear two different hats, but there's other individuals from CAP who would like to attend future meetings. Please feel free to let me know. But I did want to kind of recognize you since you serve in the advisory committee, but also as a connection for our group to CAP. I didn't want to not invite anyone who was part of the stakeholder meetings earlier, but there were several stakeholders. So if there are any other individuals that people think would be helpful, the goal of the meeting today is to really get into a lot of the information here. If there is a recommendation by the advisory committee, the full BSRB really has more authority to make decisions on some of these things as it would relate to legislation. But the board is meeting July 20th. So if the committee could do the work today, come to a recommendation perhaps, then that is something the board could consider at the July board meeting. So, and again, that July board meeting would be July 20th. It's a Monday, and the board usually meets from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. So the other individual I wanted to recognize is Tim Resner. He serves as legal counsel to assist the BSRB board, and he was gracious to attend the meeting today as well. He was attending the stakeholder meetings this spring as well too. So are there any individuals present that I have missed or did not recognize? Okay, well, if not, in your packet of material, like I mentioned, the proposal today will really focus more on potential flexibilities to the BSRB's student addiction counselor license. So I included two different documents in your packet. One is a copy of KSA 65-6611. This is a statute that really goes under some of the temporary licenses for the BSRB. There is a traditional temporary license, and that is for individuals basically when they have met the qualifications for a permanent license, except passage of the licensing examination, and they are able to get a temporary license and work up to 2 years while holding that temporary license. What we're going to focus on today is something a little bit different, and that is a student temporary license. And so the student temporary license was designed, like I said, back in 2022, enacted in 2023, that would really focus on an individual who is a student, who has not attained a bachelor's degree, but has a certain number of hours. And the way that that license was designed, I'll just go ahead and share my screen here and briefly kind of talk through a couple of the items that are part of that mock-up. And then I'll turn it over to Travis and he can talk about the proposed adjustments to the student temporary license. So this is, I'm sharing a copy of my screen. This is KSA 65-6611. And starting here at the bottom in section G, the way the BSRB's student temporary license was designed was that someone would have completed at least 60 credit hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field. They would need an attestation from the applicants stating that they intend to pursue permanent licensure as an addiction counselor and to meet the remaining educational requirements within the next 48 months. They would need to provide an education plan signed by the institution, including steps to complete the coursework to become a licensed addiction counselor. There would be a signed attestation from a prospective employer who intends to offer employment to that position. There would also be the submission of a supervision plan signed by the person who's employed and the prospective employer. It talks about the amount of supervision that would be needed, 4 hours of supervision per month, and not fewer than 2 supervision meetings per month. Additionally, there was a requirement that the person would merit the public trust, that they would be at least 20 years of age, and that they would pay a relevant fee. And then at the conclusion of the 2-year time frame, if they had not met the requirements to become a permanent licensee and they were still pursuing coursework, they could potentially get an extension, a one-time extension of their student temporary license for another period of 2 years. But they had to demonstrate that they were essentially making good progress towards satisfying the requirements for a licensed addiction counselor license. And so I just kind of wanted to walk through that briefly. And so that is what's currently in law. And now I'll turn it back over to Travis Lowe, and he can talk about the proposal or background, or I'll just turn it over to you, Travis, and you can present information for the advisory committee.
Thank you, Dave. Can you hear me okay? All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the committee for the opportunity to discuss this topic. We really appreciate this evolving conversation, and we know it's a privilege to be invited here this morning. As previously mentioned, I'm Travis Lowe, a contract lobbyist for Acadia Healthcare, and look forward to having Aaron jump in here in just a second with some additional details. Acadia Healthcare provides behavioral health services across the country, and in Kansas, as Aaron mentioned, operates the Wichita Comprehensive Treatment Center. We see this as one of the leading provider for Kansas, serving more than 500 patients at any given time. As Dave mentioned, House Bill 2506, which is not our proposal here this morning, but at its core is a workforce bill that we believe would respond directly to ongoing shortages in addiction treatment services by addressing a practical problem that our clinics face every day. And we do see House Bill 2506 as a work in progress and admit that it doesn't exactly reflect what we had originally had in mind. For the history of why we're here, which we believe is important, for years, our center has sought to work with KDADs in particular on developing a framework that allows workers who are not fully licensed to expand their ability to help at the clinics. And we have been reviewing other programs in nearby states where this is common. So the intent of the bill is to create an opportunity for people who are not fully licensed to assist more in the clinic beyond answering phones and doing just true clerical work. Now, the bill based before you that Dave mentioned, House Bill 2506, is not exactly what we had in mind, as it created a full licensure component that was beyond our original intent. And due to legislative deadlines, we just did not have the opportunity to make proactive changes before the bill was finalized in early January. So the genesis of this bill, we saw working with the clinics, primarily KDADs, it would not include a full licensure component. And so admittingly didn't have a huge purview under the BSRB. You know, as stakeholders here, we were working to navigate the different lanes of BSRB and KDADs, trying to work in good faith with both. And we really appreciate Dave and Leslie Allen's feedback over the last several months as we've had this evolving conversation together, raising very appropriate questions, and we've taken those to heart. As we mentioned before, it was not our intent to create a full license that would dive into the details of exams and licensure terms. The examples that we had shared really the last 3 calendar years with KDADs were examples of other states where these people are not fully licensed, or they are interns, or they are students, but not a full licensed program. But our intent was to create a base layer for people who are interested in this as a future career, and also as an opportunity to provide more opportunities for our clinics to serve more patients. We really appreciate the discussions that took place earlier this year. Many of the folks on this call right here on this meeting were part of those conversations. We really appreciate the House Health Committee Chairman, Will Carpenter, and his Vice Chair, Dr. Ron Bryce, who convened a meeting with us, BSRB, to discuss this and how we can find common ground. And as mentioned earlier by the executive director, we were charged to develop a compromise by July 31st, and we take that charge by the chairman very seriously. On our end, in the internal conversation since our last stakeholder group conversations, we recognize that there are several different ways to proceed. We can take House Bill 2506, admittingly not what we had in mind, and make improvements to better reflect what we do have in mind to create the Addiction Counselor Apprentice Program. Or we can develop a new framework completely, or we can make improvements to the existing student program, but with amendments that would, we believe, lower barriers to entry. Now, the original, as we mentioned earlier, the original intent was to create a base opportunity for career development and expand access to care for our patients. And instead of what some may view as a parallel track, if the stakeholders are willing, it may be most efficient to amend the current student program located in 656611. As we mentioned earlier in our stakeholder meetings, when we viewed that program, as Dave mentioned, which is just a few short years old, we believe that too restrictive to accomplish what we really had in mind originally, which was showing examples from other states of people who are not or who are unlicensed professionals or interns. And so without proactively working to amend somebody else's program, our original thought was to develop a base layer underneath it. And so given the feedback that we've heard and some of the concern of creating a parallel program that some could argue has a lot of duplication, we'd be respectfully requesting the opportunity to just make improvements, what we believe would be improvements to the current program, to keep that framework in existence, not add an additional program if we could mutually agree to make the barriers a little less restrictive to move in. So with that in mind, as Dave mentioned, we've modified our approach, our recommendation to making amendments to the student program. We have just 3 amendments to that we believe would improve access or the ability entries to do that would be lower the college hours required, to reduce or to eliminate the age limit or to do that, and then also adding some defined scope opportunities for the students who are in that program. Now, the languages, the language from the amendments that are included in that attachment are not the scope that was proposed in 2506. Admittingly, that is not what we had in mind either. What we have put before you today is language that we have taken from other states. In this language, we've provided the BSRB several months ago. We've shared those with KNADS over the last 3 years, but it is regulatory language found in other states that is allowed for unlicensed professionals, students, and or interns. We, of course, would yield to the wisdom of Tim Resner on wordsmithing and anything that he would deem appropriate. And I will, at this time, yield to Aaron Donahoe to speak to our modified proposal and why it would make sense at the clinic level. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm super grateful and excited to collaborate with this group to continue moving forward with revisions to the student temporary addiction license and or creating additional opportunities to strengthen Kansas workforce. Again, my name is Erin Donahue. I serve as a regional director with Acadia Healthcare, and I currently oversee our Wichita CTC facility here in Kansas. I'm here to discuss what I believe is a practical, targeted opportunity to strengthen Kansas's behavioral health workforce by updating the student temporary addiction counselor license. The proposal that we're bringing forward today is intended, like Travis said, to remove barriers while maintaining appropriate safeguards so that we can better meet the growing demand for services across the state. Just to provide a little historical context to why we are bringing this forward. Kansas continues to face a significant gap between the number of individuals experiencing substance use and mental health disorders and the actual availability of qualified professionals to treat them. In many communities, this translates directly into delayed care, longer wait lists, and missed opportunities for early intervention. From a provider perspective, the workforce shortage is not just theoretical, it's operational. At our Wichita facility, for example, it currently takes more than 5 months to fill a single counselor vacancy. More than half, or 56%, of our applicants are excluded upfront because they do not meet the current student temporary license requirements, despite having relevant education and a clear interest in the field. This workforce shortage has had real and serious consequences on our daily operations and patient care at Wichita CTC. In 2023, for example, we were forced to place our program on an admission hold for more than 2 months because our staffing levels did not meet the state's mandated caseload ratios, and we did not have enough qualified candidates to fill open positions. During that time, we had to turn away patients who were actively seeking treatment for opioid use disorder, patients who were at risk and in need of life-saving care. This is not a hypothetical problem. It is directly impacting access to treatment in our communities. At the state level, the constraints are just as clear. We heard from David earlier that there are currently 57 active student temporary addiction counselor licenses statewide. Unfortunately, that number is just simply not aligned with the scale of need in the state, particularly for entry-level roles that are essential to maintaining access to care. We believe that there is a responsible path forward that expands the workforce without compromising quality and also meriting public trust. Allowing students to enter the field after completing 18 credit hours rather than 60 would preserve foundational education requirements while meaningfully increasing the pool of eligible candidates. It would also create a stronger pipeline by giving students earlier exposure to real-world clinical environments, improving both retention and long-term workforce stability. To support this, we are proposing 3 focused updates to the current license structure. I'm going to build on top of these as Travis previously explained. First, we suggest removing the age requirement. The existing educational thresholds already embedded in the student temp license type ensure appropriate level of maturity and accountability. We're definitely flexible on this point and, of course, willing to collaborate and communicate on this further. However, we don't see that an age requirement is necessary to maintain program integrity. Second, we suggest adjusting the education requirement from 60 completed credit hours to 18. 60 credit hours effectively represents an associate's degree, which is inconsistent with the intent of a student-level credential. An 18-hour threshold better aligns with workforce entry models used in other health professions and allows Kansas to compete more effectively for emerging talent. Also, just to piggyback off of this point, 60 credit hours, assuming an associate's degree, would be assuming that this student is full-time. Full-time would be interpreted as 12 credit hours per semester, so 60 credit hours would essentially equal an associate's degree. However, many of our candidates are taking care of families, they're attending school, they're potentially working a second job, and a full-time school schedule is just not realistic for all of our candidates at this time. We do see a lot of candidates entering the pool that are currently enrolled in school at 6 credit hours per semester. And just to kind of paint the picture, 6 credit hours per semester with a 60 credit requirement for this student temp license type would take 5 years before that individual could even enter the workforce to start working. So we're essentially delaying workforce start date by 3 years with this 60 credit requirement, and we're potentially losing really valuable candidates to other areas and other states with less stringent requirements. Importantly, I do want to reiterate that Kansas would not be an outlier in taking this approach. Many states, particularly across the Midwest and South, already operate under tiered or trainee-based models that allow individuals to begin working in substance use disorder treatment early while completing their education under supervision. For example, in Texas, individuals can begin their careers as counselor interns with 270 documented education hours and a signed educational waiver, provided they are registered and working under supervision, and have a structured pathway toward full licensure. Tennessee also offers a level 1 addiction counselor credential that allows individuals to enter the field with a high school diploma and 270 documented education hours. These states are not lowering standards, they're building workforce pipelines. And today, Kansas risks falling behind. When our requirements are more restrictive than surrounding states, we risk effectively pushing entry-level talent elsewhere and compromising patient and client care. These models in the other states that I just mentioned are grounded in the same principle that we are proposing today. Early supervised workforce entry strengthens the pipeline, increases access to care, and does so without sacrificing accountability or quality. Aligning Kansas with this broader, proven approach would ensure we are not unintentionally restricting entry into the field compared to peer states, and would better position us to address ongoing workforce shortages. And then our third suggested update to the Student Temp Addiction Counselor license would be to establish a clearly defined scope of practice. The current student temp license does speak to limitations on the license type. However, it doesn't speak to actual allowable scope of practice. Excuse me. This absence creates ambiguity for providers and payers, particularly around supervision, duties, and reimbursement from payers. Clarifying scope will improve compliance, consistency, and overall system efficiency. So at its core, this proposal is about modernizing regulation to better reflect both workforce realities and patient and client needs. Our goals are straightforward: to expand and stabilize the addiction counseling workforce across the state and to help ensure that all Kansans have timely access to care. Again, thank you all so much for your time. I really look forward to continuing to work together, and I'm very excited to be here and be part of this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron and Travis. Are there any other presenters from Acadia? No? Okay. Well, I definitely want to open it up and allow members of the committee to ask questions. I think what might be helpful before we begin that process, you had presented or provided a copy of a marked up version of the statute that talks about the student temporary addiction counselor license with the proposed changes. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I just think it could be helpful for the members of the committee to be able to see those proposed changes for the statute. So I am sharing a copy on my screen here of the marked up version of 65-6611. And for those of you, we looked at the statute already once this morning with the existing law. The proposed changes would start here in section G when the student temporary license is explained. And so as I referenced an existing law, someone would need to complete at least 60 credit hours. The first change would be to strike 60 and insert 18 instead. And then the next proposed change would be under G, item 7, and that is the removal of the minimum age of 20. And then the scope of practice that was described is inserted here as a new item number or letter J. And so under the scope of practice language that would be added, it would say a scope of practice under clinical supervision, a person holding a student temporary addiction counselor license may A, provide direct care to clients and serve as the primary counselor for an assigned caseload. B, conduct case management activities and make referrals to appropriate resources. C, participate in treatment planning, care conferences, and discharge planning. D, advocate for clients in treatment decisions. And E, prepare documentation related to recovery services, including assessments, progress notes, and treatment plans. There's also some new language that says nothing in this subsection shall be construed to authorize a person holding a student temporary addiction counseling license to engage in the independent practice of addiction counseling. All services authorized in this subsection shall be provided under the supervision as required above. And then 3, a person holding a student temporary addiction counselor license shall not represent such person as a licensed addiction counselor, master's addiction counselor, or clinical addiction counselor, except as authorized in the section. So I thought it'd be helpful for members of the committee to be able to visualize the 3 proposed changes. Now I'll go ahead and open it up if members of the advisory committee have questions from the representatives of Acadia or Travis Lowe, or any kind of comments or discussion.
I wanted to say about the 18 credit hours. What I'm finding is that even somebody who had the 60 credit hours, if they're going to school to get their bachelor's degree at a part-time rate, it's difficult to even get completed within the 2 years. If they're starting with just 18 credit hours, I don't even know how it would be possible for them to complete everything, all of the credit requirements by even the end of the additional 2-year extension. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Charity. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee?
I just kind of follow up on Charity's question. Are those 18 hours of classes specific to addiction counseling?
So
Or-
the existing statute would say 60 credit hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field as defined in the rules and regulations. And so the proposed change would be to strike the 60 and have 18. So I believe the way the statute would read would be 18 hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field based on the way it's currently worded.
Would that then, this be that they are in an addiction counseling licensure program, and it could be introduction to Spanish that they're taking as part of those 18 hours, or do the 18 hours really need to be related specifically to addiction counseling?
And I would probably ask if Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the board, to weigh in, because when the existing language was added to law, she works with licensing staff and the applicants that submit materials under this. So Leslie, in terms of that question, in terms of looking at the emphasis of addiction counseling or a related field, could you just kind of comment on our current process for that?
Currently, there are no addiction-specific courses required to get the student temp. If you want there to be specific courses in the 18 hours, that would need to be added to the statute.
Is that something that Acadia would be willing to consider, as just ensuring that those 18 hours are related to addiction counseling?
Can I add 2 questions that will to that same thing? Same topic. So Leslie, if there are currently none required, but the current statute says that they have to be like with a focus in addiction counseling, how do you define that if you aren't looking at the classes they're taking?
We're looking at the degree program or the certificate program if they already have a degree.
Okay, so it's just what they're enrolled in.
Right.
Okay.
I also think that when we initially talked about this, it was requiring the 60 credit hours was kind of a level of professionalism and ethics and things like that. Would a person with just 18 hours who was going to be stepping into the role of a student addictions counselor, have that level of professionalism? I think that was kind of something we had talked about when we first started talking about this, the student counselor.
I agree. I think at 18 hours, speaking as somebody who employs and works with staff, I'd be very concerned about their skill level and professionalism in meeting with patients. I understand there's supervision required, but I'm sure supervisors aren't sitting with them the entire time they're in every single session. To be able to provide that support and guidance, I'd be concerned about where they were at only 18 hours, especially if they're not addiction or counseling specific classes. It's Spanish or government or whatever else they have to have mixed in with those. It would be a significant concern.
And just to clarify, the existing statute says 60 credit hours with an emphasis in addiction counseling or a related field. The term related field is defined in the regulation that is in KAR 102-7-1, which is the definitions for addiction counseling. A related field is defined as a degree program in a helping profession and may include any of the following: criminal justice, counseling, healing arts, human development and family studies, human services, marriage and family therapy, nursing, psychology, social work, or theology. So in terms of that definition, just wanted to clarify there is a definition in the regulation, and that's what it states.
Can I add one more thing? Because we had talked about this before, but the word case management was in the original bill for addiction counselors, and it was purposefully removed so that it did not imply that case managers needed to be licensed somehow. They felt that there could be unintended consequences that would trickle down. So there may be some language that, would want to be developed that would maybe lay out what they're doing, but not include case management.
And Leslie, could you elaborate a little bit? There was a question in terms of the scope of practice, and the representatives from Acadia have offered some language to clearly define the scope of practice for a student addiction counselor. Could you talk about how the scope of practice for, let's say, addiction counselors and student addiction counselors, how we currently look to that topic when someone asks a question about scope of practice?
So the scope of practice would, for a student temp, would be the same as an addiction counselor, except that it would be determined by their level of education, training, and experience. That's why that's why it doesn't have its own scope of practice.
And oh, sorry, go ahead, Christina.
Oh, just a question, I guess. Going from 60 hours to 18 hours, again, I know, the rationale to reduce. Was there a reason that 18 hours? I mean, you said like a usually a semester is 12 hours, like 24 would be, at least two semesters, full-time semesters. Was there a reason to go that much to 18? Where did the 18 come from?
Great question, Christina, and I can kind of maybe answer multiple things. So we did look at other states and their education requirements and did some comparison. I can share details from other states that are helpful. I think our main intention was with 18 credits, you're at least beyond one semester, right? 12 credits would be first semester, and then with 18 credits, potentially you're in your second semester, maybe even third or fourth, depending on if you're a part-time student. So they at least have some experience in education under their belt, specifically pertaining to ethics and confidentiality. That's definitely something, that could be discussed as well. Mandatory coursework included in those 18 hours. Our main intention with reducing that 60 credit hour requirement is just allowing individuals to enter the workforce earlier and start gaining that, really valuable experiential learning as well. I think something that's important for counselors too, right, is to determine if this is the correct field for them. So having that experiential learning early on in their career, I think, is important, and also opens the door for more patients to receive treatment. I think our top concern here is that we're still seeing opioid overdose deaths continuing to increase in the state. And if we ever get in a position of having to go on an admission hold again, based on workforce shortages, more patients are going to suffer because of that. So we're just really trying to open up the workforce based on recruiting and staffing challenges that we've had over the last 3 to 4 years. And that 60 credit requirement has consistently come forward as a barrier for us. But we're negotiable, of course.
And I'm thinking, just going way back, way back, when I was first entering the field, there was, and Leslie, you may remember this or can speak to this more fully, but we used to have, there were certain courses you had to take back before we had licensure, when it was certification. I see Lisa and Jill also remembering this. We had certain courses you had to take. So even as a social worker, as an LMSW, I was taking these specific courses so that I could act as an addictions counselor in that capacity years ago. So, I mean, I think that's something we've had in Kansas before, where that was pretty prescriptive. Aaron, to your point too about allowing people to know if this is the field that's right for them. We were just talking about this emerging evidence about the importance of expectations coming into, like, this was more related to social work, but expectations being met of people understanding the demands and understanding the roles that they're going to fill does help with retention. So I think that does, I guess, just to validate that point of allowing people that experience may actually help with retention later on, that they know full well going in kind of what to expect in those roles. So anyway.
Yeah, and to Christina's comment, we had the old CIT. Perhaps we, as Travis indicated, instead of reinventing something, we revamp the things that we've had in the past.
We did look back. David and I had a long conversation with a previous board member, and we did look back at the requirements, even for when we just had the apps credential, it required college education, where a lot of the other states surrounding us may have a license. They also have many levels of certification that we don't have. And so these people that are not licensed are being certified or doing education that is outside of a university setting, or, I mean, there's all different models, but I think that's why it's become so difficult to figure this out. There, every state has different requirements and models.
And I think, and does that, and just again, trying to clarify in my own brain here, when we talk about licensure versus certification, then that has implications on it, correct? Like if someone's licensed and providing services that can be reimbursable versus certification, am I thinking of that correctly, that has implications towards billing? Or maybe not.
Well, Christina, you bring up an issue that is part of this conversation too. And I didn't mention this at the very beginning, but part of the reason that we have different stakeholders present is because the BSRB's jurisdiction is shared somewhat with KDAD's when it comes to assisting with workforce. On one hand, a lot of the requirements in terms of can someone legally provide these types of services without facing a disciplinary complaint or certain things like that falls under the jurisdiction of the BSRB. But in general, things like reimbursement for services would be in an outside agency, most likely under the Department for Aging and Disability Services. So I think part of what Acadia is looking for is something that is a good system where under the BSRB or potentially in a system outside of the BSRB, they have something that is set up for individuals to not be working outside of a defined, framework for them to be able to provide services. But also as another step in this process is that those services would be reimbursable, because that part of this is really important for them to be able to utilize those individuals in a way that makes sense for their facility. So as part of this conversation, the BSRB's piece of it may be, can we have an existing modification to the framework to allow this person to legally practice? As part of this conversation too, there will be questions about reimbursements and things like that, although those are likely to fall under KDAD's or another state agency.
A couple of just other quick things. One, I just to do service to all the addiction healthcare professionals in Kansas and the work that Kansas has been doing. The comment was made earlier that overdose deaths continue to increase, and we've actually seen a reduction in that recently. And so I think that's important to recognize. And I don't know if that takes away any of the urgency for you in getting this adopted. But you also had mentioned it's taking 5 months to get positions filled at Acadia, and I'm wondering if you have talked with other providers who have echoed similar things, speaking now, putting on my Kansas Association of Addiction Professionals cap. Within our association, that's not currently the experience of it taking nearly that long to fill positions.
Jason, we thank you for that feedback. We definitely have collaborated with other local agencies who are experiencing some of the same challenges. Maybe not as drastically as we are at our Wichita location, but I'm curious from you, Jason, how long does it traditionally take for you guys to fill open positions in your agency, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
So speaking for my agency, we have a wait list of applicants, but we're a different type of agency. The agency I'm with now, and so it's not taking any time at all to fill the positions.
Okay. I think the thing that we struggle with at this location is the mandated caseload ratio, the 50 patients to one counselor. Of course, there's flexibility around patients who've been in treatment for 2 years, counting as 0.5 of a patient. That was a great flexibility that helped us. But when we can't fill these counselor roles just based on, applicant interest, them not meeting requirements, and these mandated caseload ratios, that's what puts us in the position of going on a hold. We are currently close to that point, unfortunately, because we have not been able to successfully fill 2 open roles. Again, that's because a majority of our candidates, about 56%, are high school applicants applying. They just don't meet the education requirement to apply for that student temp license. But very, interesting feedback from your agency as well. We've heard it pretty collectively from other OTPs that they've shared the same staffing challenges. Not sure if it's more of an opioid treatment program, concern, but definitely wanting to kind of open the pipeline for all Kansas counselors as well, if there's other agencies struggling.
So work in the field, not as an OTP, something more similar to what Jason does. I've never had a high school student apply to any of our openings. I'll be real honest with you. We do get a lot of people who are close to graduating. I graduate in May and it's November or whatever. We get some of that, but I've never had anyone who wasn't very close to that process apply to any of our positions.
I think this is a, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I had just a lot of questions and I had a lot of comments and then a question. But similar to and also feeding into what was just said about high school students, what we've been noticing here at Washburn and just I think in general, high school students are able to earn college credits now, especially for us, they can earn through WooTech. And so they're coming in with a semester or 2 of college credits. So I would be concerned with the age limit. And also, when I look at the LCDC, let's say in Texas that was mentioned, they do have an age limit, which is 18. And so that would be something that would, at least to me, the minimum in terms of 18 in terms of expectation. In terms of college credits and units and what that means, I guess we could, figure out what that looks like for people or for, agencies or what that means for us. But what it would mean is also, I think it was Christina, you mentioned that that it would mean that it would affect the renewability. So the renewability would need to be raised or increased or however many years because people are doing it, which is a good point to raise in terms of part-time, that this would take 2 or 3, 4 or 5 more years, in terms of being able to complete those degrees and what that would look like for that. And then in terms of scope of practice, I think it is great to be able to have something that clearly defines it because I know agencies are really confused and they ask us often, what can student temporaries do versus a temporary versus a LAC versus an LMAC, what does that look like in the differences? However, clearly defining it, of course, we do have PCCMs, which are through KDADs, maybe taking out the case management piece, but also if that clearly defined scope of practice doesn't align with other kind of licensing, then maybe it shouldn't be there, or maybe we should just include in other things too. I don't know, but I do like that part of that scope of practice of being able to define that. But I do want to make sure it's aligned with other licensings and things that we have that are available, so that everyone is hearing the same thing and doing the same things. And the question I have is, when you say 56% are excluded for the student temporary, are you saying is it just because of their age or just because of what's excluding them? Do you have those kind of statistics or anecdotally of what that means in terms of what's excluding these applicants?
Great question. They don't currently meet the 60 credit requirement. So they're applying before they can apply for their student temp license. They don't have that. They're still applying for the role in the hopes to gain the student temp license upon hire with the employer attestation. Maybe you said that wrong, but they don't meet the 60 credit requirement initially.
Erin, I had a question for you, kind of along the lines that Zenova was mentioning in terms of the age. I think when some people think about individuals starting to take college courses, they think about individuals moving straight from high school, but especially in the addiction field, you may have individuals who have done other things and then are coming back later and taking courses. So are the applicants you're seeing I'm kind of curious along what she was asking, are most of the issues related to the age or the coursework, perhaps?
Great question as well. Coursework. I would say a majority of our applicants are actually maybe 40s to 50s in age range. So the age requirement's really not been an issue. It's the coursework requirement that's been the barrier to entry for us.
And just for some just to kind of clarify, for our licensed addiction counselors that require completion of the bachelor's degree, the statute does say that they would have to be at least 21 years old. When the student temporary license was being discussed by the board did have a discussion about, what would be the appropriate age for someone who had less coursework, and there were, they discussed age 19, ultimately decided to settle on age 20. But I think that there were some at least concerns by some members of the board regarding, at what age is it too low where there would be a risk in terms of the public protection. So it is helpful to kind of hear that at least for some of the applicants, that age is not the same factor because maybe they're starting their careers at a later point, or at least starting at work in this area at a different point in their life. So. Any other questions?
Just David and Leslie, a quick question for you. Are there any other disciplines in Kansas that the BSRB licenses that offers a license to anyone with a high school degree without any college currently?
Not in our permanent licenses, because this is the first profession that had a student temporary license. All the other licenses under the BSRB, the permanent licenses require either a doctoral degree or a master's degree or a bachelor's degree. So this student temp was the first that would be less than a bachelor's degree. So no other professions do.
Something else that I wanted to just put out there, the board was looking at amending the student temp language to remove that the coursework had to be in a related field or addiction counseling. Because the LAC, you can have a bachelor's degree in anything as long as you have the specific coursework. So we have not put a bill forth or requested that, but that was something that the board had approved to allow the coursework just to be 60 hours of coursework. If we're going to go in and change the statute, we may want to do all of it at once.
David, I had just a quick procedural question. Is this the time allotted to have the full discussion of this, or is this just mainly for questions for Katie?
It's a great question. Yeah, this was primarily for questions with the or presentation of information, and then some questions. Like we do have some other presentations on the agenda today. So there is a time later in the agenda for more of a discussion with the advisory committee. So in the interest of time, maybe it would be helpful to kind of move to one of the other presenters and to make sure we have everything covered. So. And Jill, is it okay with you if we move to one of the presenters?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I know we have a representative, I believe two, maybe from the Board of Nursing. And like we said, we wanted to provide some other information to the representatives from Acadia as far as some other alternatives in terms of staffing in the area of mental health or behavioral health. And so I'll recognize our representatives from the Board of Nursing if they could share a little bit about the mental health technician program. And they've been asked to share information about what those individuals are able to do, and then some of their education and preparations for those positions.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I hope I can keep this kind of focused where you want this. It's a little bit of an interesting pathway. So the licensed mental health technician kind of started out of a need in the workforce for state-operated hospitals. This was back in the 70s. So there were 8 hospitals then, and they kind of came together, and they were having trouble recruiting and retaining registered nurses. So how it kind of got there is they developed this as an occupational role that could support inpatient psychiatric care. And it was at a level kind of between the nurses' aid roles and the nursing roles, which is kind of how it ended up in nursing rather than in behavioral health. But I think the role since the 70s may have changed somewhat. We saw a lot of mental health technician licenses in the 70s, 80s. We probably had up to 200 of them at one point. We currently have about 30 licensed people in the state of Kansas. And we're not even sure how many of those are active. They have to renew every 2 years, and it's always in an even year. So the last even year in 24, we went from 37 to 33. So that's kind of where we are with that. But the role was developed along with the state hospitals, and I don't know who all the other inputs were, but they ended up writing a licensed mental health technician act. So it has its own statute and regulations that's kind of along with the Nurse Practice Act, but it's not under it. It's a separate act, but we are responsible for all of the regulations, of the statute and regulations for that program. So I think the unique thing about that was they put some specific didactic hour requirements and clinical hour requirements to that program. At the beginning, it was 250 hours didactic with specific inclusion of human growth and development, behavioral sciences. There had to be, I think, at least 3 credit hours, what would be equivalent of 3 credit hours for behavioral sciences, human growth and development, foundational nursing course. I don't know if CNA was accepted at the time as that foundational course, but they had to have some additional to make sure that they could at least do some basic skills. And then also in therapies related to what they'd be doing, so that they could assist in and for the hospitals, giving medications was part of that. So it was never in the regulation. The medication part was never in the regulation, but it does say therapies, which I think a lot of the programs had considered medication to be a type of therapy. So that had been something that they really wanted as part of that. What happened was, I think, as hospitals closed, Osawatomie became kind of the only one to still have a program. They tried to get Larned to also have one, but just the inconsistencies in the people who were instructing and the ability for the students to be able to, they were really only taking their own people who were coming in at basic levels and then trying to get them elevated to that licensed mental health technician role. But I think that the disruption, the turnover in nursing, the turnover in people involved with the programs created problems. I will have to tell you that there's been a couple different times along the way. One was before me. I've been with the board for 8 years. One was right before, and probably in the 5 years preceding me, that they almost decided to sunset this whole and not even do the programs because there just wasn't a lot of, there were not people coming through that program. There kind of was a resurgence right before I came, so it stayed. We have been going through a process, and I would say it's the last 2 years, where we have also considered the fact that those are going down, but that has been more of a COVID issue. So a couple things happened. Once in the year 2000, I think it was because they were having trouble with nursing, they tried to kind of elevate this role a little bit. They didn't do anything to pay scale necessarily, but they required more hours. So this program changed in regulation and became 450 hours of didactic and 450 hours of clinical. Now, remember, these were all people who were probably already working there, so their clinical was pretty well taken care of for them, as part of their routine. They were already working at another level, so they were able to get their hours in. What happened in the last probably 5 to 6 years is, as other people inquired about the need for this position and whether we should have other programs, I think one of the things is there is no college credit for any of this program the way it was developed. It was all done by the state hospital. They were the ones that had the approved program. So what was happening is this: if any of those folks that were in that program and had done all those hours, if they decided they wanted to go on to something more, either in behavioral health or in nursing or another path, they had no college credit to get started with. So they were basically starting over. So that's when the conversation started, probably about six years ago, about even getting the basics, taking the human growth and development, taking the behavioral sciences, giving them some college credit, maybe even a foundational nursing course. We were trying to work with nursing programs at that point. Would something be possible? So we've been on that roller coaster since then about trying to figure it out. And we've had community colleges interested in possibly developing this program, but they can't do it at the 900-hour level. Credit hours for that would then put the program over what we require for associate degree and possibly even some of our BSN programs. So I would say the last 2 years have really been devoted. We've had a task force trying to look at the role itself. And two other things about the license itself. There's no other state that they can go to. When they're licensed for Kansas. There were at one point, there were 3 other states that had a licensed behavioral health technician or licensed mental health technician role, but none of ours were the same. 2 of the other states would accept licensed mental health techs from other states as long as it met their requirements. And I think ours did in Arkansas and Colorado, but not California. Theirs is very extensive. But Arkansas has sunsetted their program. Colorado has still has a very small contingency program. And then there's us and California, which I said they have a very specific, and theirs is more at an LPN, between an LPN and RN level. So we are in a state of flux about what this program really looks like. But in the meantime, we've had 2 schools, one Wichita State University and then WSU Tech, both submitted initial applications to do an LMHT program in their schools. And a lot of that impetus is because of the new mental health facility that's going into Wichita. But now there's been some discussion about what that role really requires. When COVID happened, the state did some things to try to retain their staffing in those facilities. They really struggled. They were up to 70% traveling nurses. What they inadvertently did was raise the pay level for their mental health technicians, which is a little bit lower level, but they did not do so for their licensed mental health techs. So there was no longer an incentive to get that license because there was no pay differential at all. It was crazy. So that was why we kind of considered whether the program should even be sunsetted. We really weren't getting anywhere with it. Currently, both WSU Tech and WSU are putting people through a program. WSU has a pathway where they're taking people who, it's not even its own program. Basically, you can be in any of the behavioral health programs. You could be in counseling, you could be in social work, you could be in nursing. But if you're already taking the classes and getting the hours that you need, they basically are making sure you have classes available so that you can get all the hours required, and then you can apply for the license and work before you get to your level of whatever other degree you're looking at trying to do. I think we currently have maybe 11 people in their program, and that's in the last 2 years. And one I know is nearing completion. and we'll be testing, which is another issue is the test, but we won't go there. But WSU Tech, it actually has a program. So they have a 2-level program. One, you can earn the hours needed for the LMHT in your first year, and then you can go on to earn an associate's degree. And I'm not sure if it still is the same license, but they may be eligible for other things beyond that associate degree then. And they are getting ready to graduate their first class. I believe they had 9 that started this program. So that's where we are now. Osawatomie actually has their program on hold. We had one other facility that was doing the program, and theirs is on hold. So Wichita is really our only 2 right now. The regulations still need to be updated. And so we have included KDADs in some of that conversations recently. I feel like there's probably even more. We were looking at one point and whether nursing was the right place to have this. Should it be a license? Should it be more of a certification, at least at the level that it currently is? I know that if as we continue to look at it, we are looking for that input as to where this licensed mental health technician, where could they sit? Are there other things they could do besides what the original role was? Because it's fairly expansive if you look at the statute and regulations. It could include quite a bit, but I think anything is going to need additional training depending on where they go. And I think that's why maybe it hasn't caught on is other places, as they're using mental health technicians, they're kind of doing their own onboarding programs because they have very specific needs. So they haven't really utilized the licensed technician because of all the hours. It's hard to, after all those hours, to get them in there. So we're looking at ways to either, it may still be that we end up sunsetting the licensure program, but we don't know that at this point. We just know it needs to have some changes. So that's essentially what it is. If you have more questions, I'd be glad to answer them more specifically. I wasn't quite sure how specific to be.
Thank you, Janelle. I appreciate the overview. Could you give me just a brief sort of estimate in terms of beginning the education process for those positions to the end? How long of a time frame does that usually take?
Well, it initially started out when they were doing it at the state hospitals. They said it had to be at least 6 months. So they were running them through pretty quickly. I think for WSU, it's been in WSU Tech, it's going to be more like 12 to 18 months, depending on like with WSU, because they're doing their classes, they're getting classes as they go. It might take them a little longer to complete all the requirements that we currently have.
And you mentioned, you sort of alluded to the types of services that they could provide. Could you provide a little more detail in terms of what a mental health technician is able to do?
I was trying to look, their curriculum includes, the behavioral health sciences, including human needs, group processes, family dynamics, social, economic, and cultural factors of behavior, basic nursing concepts, psychiatric therapeutic treatment. They wanted that course to include on interpersonal relationships, psychopathology and classifications, coping mechanisms, communication skills, therapeutic modalities, and recording techniques. So again, I think if you think about what inpatient psych treatment is, I mean, it can cover a variety. The basic thing was they wanted to cover these things so they would know how to act and kind of how to, I consider it kind of like if we take our LPNs and we added more specific behavioral health components and more education in the psychotherapies and that kind of thing, that's kind of what they were using them for. So the scope is somewhat some nursing. You have some basic nursing care, but you're also then they're responsible for medications, not all, but some of the basic medications and monitoring that. And then also assisting with group therapies, managing patients who might have with whatever behavioral health disorder. So they have to have some understanding of how to do that, at least at a basic level. They're always under the supervision of an RN, but they still have, at least in the state hospitals, they had quite a bit of autonomy.
And then I just had one more question for you. Do you know if they're able to bill currently under the state's system?
I do not think so. That was never intended. It's sort of like the nursing role. They have a role in there, but at this point in time, they are not, is my understanding, they are not an independent billing role.
Okay. Well, thank you for all that information. That is really helpful. Advisory committee members or other attendees, do you have any questions for Janelle?
Just real quick, tonight, you probably mentioned this, but how many total hours is it required of that?
We go by its contact hours. So right now it's 900, 450 didactic, 450 clinical.
Okay, thank you.
I can tell you, we use something that's kind of similar. It's a patient care aid. It doesn't require any requirements, but somebody with that type of a background would be very much appropriate for that role. If they're able to do any sort of psychoeducation groups, not therapy groups per se, but psychoeducation, I could absolutely use somebody with that skill set in a residential setting to help support the rest of the clinical team as well as our nursing team.
Yeah, and Crystal, one of the things about that is as we're looking at what requirements are and how we could adjust this role to be more broadly helpful across behavioral health. Because like I said, we're talking with the folks that are building the hospital. We know we have a couple of other inpatient places that want to use it. We have a couple clinics that have been interested in using it. So you said in psychotherapy, in education?
Yeah, like psychoeducation. So it's like skills groups and that type of a thing. We utilize it. We have case managers and we have what we call patient care aides. That our patient care aides help with our nursing department quite a bit. They go help find patients. They help with some basic things like blood pressures and vitals and that type of a thing. They don't come with any background really necessarily in behavioral health. That's something that we have to teach. But if there were people who already had that skill set, the thing is, we don't have these folks applying to any of our positions. It could be wording, the way that we're wording our job ads, that they don't see the connection or don't feel like they're a good fit, or it could be our pay scale. Maybe we're not competitive to what they can get other places. I'm not sure. I've never looked into it. But that particular skill set that you're explaining would be potentially something that could be used in a residential treatment setting under like a patient care aid type, or some places use behavioral health techs, other type of things. But it kind of fits in my mind. Maybe I'm sure other people maybe have other thoughts, but that's kind of where that fits in. But I know one area, at least at our facility, is keeping our counselors doing therapy, and then those that don't actually have to be run by a counselor, having qualified people and somebody that has that background. If it's allowed, that would be a good set. That's that psychoeducation piece again, where they're doing like group education, not actual therapy or processing.
Oh, that's great feedback. Because like I said, we're looking at the hours because I think that is a barrier to the licensing. The other thing is we've talked a little bit to KDADs, and they may be able to say more because I think they may have some kind of certification in mental health, or behavioral health. I'm not sure how they term it, but that's kind of where we are trying to. We've had trouble because it wouldn't be an overnight thing. So do we take what we've got, decrease the hours so that we're getting a level of folk in there? Like I said, right now with the amount of hours, it's just kind of prohibitive to most because they don't even know if this is where they want to go. So if there were something that we could do that would create maybe not as many hours, because they're probably going to go into facilities where they're going to be a little bit more education for that facility. But if they had some we want to know what that basic knowledge is that they need and include that in our redo. So this is really helpful. Thank you.
I also wondered, Janelle, you've mentioned the couple terms there you used and exchanged mental health tech versus a behavioral health tech, because I feel like as we look to integrate our systems more fully, we continue to kind of silo in that approach. And so being able to look at like a behavioral health tech, I could see even just the wording of that being able to provide not just in a what we think of primarily mental health or psychiatric facility versus addictions versus behavioral health, which to me is more that umbrella term. And that may affect then, Crystal, what you're talking about, even just how people look at advertisements, job openings, those types of things. So I guess just something else to maybe think about how that could be more fully integrated.
Again, 1970s when that act came out, it was very specific. So I don't know what it would require to change that, but we know that other states use them somewhat interchangeably. So we talk to them when we talk about it. We kind of talk in the broader scope of behavioral health, knowing that our role says it's a mental health technician, but what they have underneath it really is a broader, I think, is a broader educational basis and clinical basis.
And I think that impacts then what you say, again, even just the educational requirements. I mean, I know that we're looking at that again in a related field, social work, that we are now being required as part of our competencies to include more on SUD addictions, like the idea that these things so often work hand in hand, and that we have to be comprehensive in our approaches and learning in education. So that may also affect that, Janelle, just in your education.
Great. Oh, such great input. Thank you.
And any other brief questions? I know we have representatives here from KDADS that are going to present here in a few minutes. So any last questions from for representatives for the Board of Nursing?
I just had a quick comment and question. I think definitely agreeing with a lot of what people have already been saying in terms of behavioral health technician. I do definitely think that would be better aligned with what is possibly happening, because I know at Washburn, and especially my program specifically, we have been interested in developing a behavioral health program, because we do have a nursing school here at Washburn as well. And so, but I was looking at I was looking up other behavioral health things in Kansas. I didn't realize there was already a license in mental health, because that seems like such a very specific term. And we were kind of wanting to not just do mental health, because there's so many people who have, I don't know, their hands in terms of mental health. And like, it seems just so specific versus, again, like behavioral is very more broad. So I think that'd be great. And so if that could be something that could be considered, and definitely, maybe we will, as Washburn or my department specifically, being able to get with you to figure out maybe also being a part of this program. But I do think also the reduction in hours and just how they are able to get those hours. Is it through the program they're getting the 900 hours, or is it like after they graduate? Or because that 900 hours would be far and above a bachelor's, like, because it's 400, 200, things like that. So that's like, that's a lot. That's almost a lot of hours. So yeah.
I think that was, and like I said, that happened in 2000. I'm not sure what the impetus was from the state hospitals there. I don't know whether they felt like they needed more, but they were the ones doing the program. So I don't know. I feel like that, though, it kind of got out of control for the level of, but it was a license. Everybody kept looking at license, but they weren't looking at what they were getting paid, what they were doing, where it sat in terms of the overall,
hierarchy and
thank you, hierarchy. I couldn't think of my word, but again, because there was no college credit, it also was one of those things where it was just kind of at the mercy of, I think, where state institutions were and where that came from, and kind of their ownership of that for so long. So I think we're looking at evolving that. And like I said, whether it ends up being a licensed mental health technician, or whether we can do something that broadens that. But then the question sits too, does it stay with the Board of Nursing, or is this something better? Is it better situated somewhere else in terms of its scope? So those are questions we're asking.
Okay. Well, thank you. In the interest of time, I think we probably need to hear from the KDADS presenters, but really appreciate you sharing that information. And I understand that our original presenter from KDADS, Shannon Garrett, unfortunately was under the weather, but another representative from KDADS was able to join us, Drew Adkins. And so, Drew, I understand you have some slides to kind of walk through some of the information. And we're going to try to end this part of the meeting today, I would say at least by 11:50, just to allow the committee a few minutes at the end of the meeting. But if you don't mind, I appreciate you stepping in today. If you could just go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of share your credentials so we have that in the minutes as well.
Yeah. So hey everybody, just a full disclosure, I am a stand-in substitute. So if I need to take questions back, I'm happy to do that. We've got a slide deck put together that I think should have a good amount of information. So I work over at KDADS in the Behavioral Health Commission. I'm the commissioner for behavioral health at KDADS. So we serve as the state mental health authority and the single state authority for substance abuse. We for KDADS, if you're not aware, we oversee in behavioral health the programs like the CCBHC program, psychiatric residential treatment facilities, crisis continuum, problem gambling, prevention, youth services, a whole array of stuff. So I won't elaborate on that, but just to get people grounded on kind of probably what we work on and where I'm coming from. Also, David, I've kind of just joined a little bit of this conversation. We have actually, and I know we've talked a lot about the licensed mental health technician or the LMHT. KDADS has worked on for the past few years with WSU on a behavioral health tech certification. There's also the RBT out there, so we don't have to dive into that right now. But if you want more information on that, that might just be a layer of the behavioral health versus the mental health, and LMHTs working at the state hospitals versus our plan for kind of a behavioral health tech certification and be able to be embedded kind of right out of high school and be able to go right into the workforce and then escalate that, or be able to have kind of a career ladder to get them involved. So we can share some of that information, but just thought that'd be helpful for context. So let me pull up my slides here. Let me see if I can share this. Okay, is everybody seeing that?
It is loading. Yes, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. So we were here, I think the request was to talk a little bit about the paraprofessional workforce and mental health and SUD and substance use disorder. So I think we've gotten some information put together on that, kind of what role KDOTS plays, kind of what we oversee, and what those entities essentially are and what they do. And I am not Shannon Garrett, but Shannon is our assistant commissioner for behavioral health. So she oversees our adult services, our youth services groups. And so she can be your main point of contact from here. You can always reach out to me, or Scott Engelmeyer's on the call as well. I didn't let him introduce himself, but he may have already done that. So I think we wanted to talk today about kind of, again, what I mentioned, just an overview of our recognized paraprofessional roles, define how the paraprofessionals fit into the behavioral health workforce in Kansas, and then maybe do some Q&A that I can try to stumble through as well. So again, just level setting for our paraprofessionals. So essentially how we look at that, and when we say paraprofessionals, we're really looking at people that probably need supervisory support for things. I know there was a question earlier about being able to bill the state or bill Medicaid, essentially. And so we're looking at some of these positions that are not getting to the point of, licensed mental health professional or qualified mental health professional, I think are the terms we use, but individuals that can really help alleviate burdens that we have on the workforce and try to get more bandwidth out of being able to see people and have them go uninterrupted for their services as well. So they're essential for workforce shortages, for our peer-based recovery, which I'll talk about a little bit here in a moment, entry-level counseling, and then crisis and community support. And we'll have some examples of that as well. So we'll first start out with our Kansas Certified Peer Mentors for substance use disorders. So this role includes peer-based recovery support, some relapse prevention coaching, group facilitation, some navigation, care navigation of substance use disorder services, and then support, obviously, in our residential outpatient and detox programs that we have in the state of Kansas. The eligibility for this is that the individual does have to have lived experience in substance use disorder and also in that recovery as well. So we also have our certified peer specialist for mental health recovery. Excuse me. And so the role includes there providing emotional support, recovery planning, crisis support, again, care navigation, system navigation, and some advocacy on behalf of the consumer, and very similar to our certified peer mentors. The eligibility here is that they must have lived experience within having a mental health diagnosis and going through recovery for that diagnosis. So we also have put into our programming and our policies within KDADS, and then also we have put this into our Medicaid state plan, our Kansas Certified Parent Peer Support Specialist. So this would be targeted for parents and caregivers of youth with mental health and substance use disorder needs. So again, decently similar as far as the role goes, but maybe some nuances as far as, family advocacy, system navigation, care coordination, providing support during a crisis, education on the treatment options, then also collaboration with our community mental health centers or certified community behavioral health clinics, and then also our schools as well. So the eligibility here is you have to be a parent or a caregiver with lived experience supporting a child with severe emotional disturbance or SED and or mental health and a substance use disorder. And I think that I was just trying to remember off the top of my head, I think we implemented this 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So it's decently fresh, unlike our other certified peer programs that I mentioned before. They've been around for a little while. Okay, sorry. There we go. We also have person-centered case management. This is something that our adult services, our director of adult services, and our adult services team has been doing for quite some time. So this gets folks trained for case management for individuals with substance use disorder, and we have trainings across the state every so often. I want to say it's about once a quarter, maybe more frequently than that. And a certain amount of slots that we have for roles that include identifying personal goals and recovery needs, connecting individuals to treatment and other services, as far as those services that provide some supports for determinants of health, social determinants of health. The certification that's awarded there are 12 continuing education units or CEUs. And our eligibility here, I won't go through all of this, but it does require some level of education as well, and or some human services experience. So you can see kind of the conversion there. This enables our individuals to work in KDADS and behavioral health service licensed facilities, providing these person-centered case management services for individuals in early recovery. So we also have personal care services. So this is somewhat different. This also provides an opportunity for other individuals that can provide things like, I believe, some attendant care services that we have that are available through our Medicaid state plan. Has a lot of the same, including roles, as far as I mentioned, between this and the person-centered case management. We also have about the same eligibility requirements for this, but really working with those individuals that have our licensed facilities or in those licensed facilities by KDADS, and also for individuals in early recovery. So we put this, it sounds like this has been kind of the conversation, David and team, from earlier, but we just wanted to make sure that this was mentioned as far as the additional paraprofessional roles in our KDOT's licensed facilities, because it runs the gamut. So you have the LMHTs, you also have the behavioral health technician, which I mentioned earlier. You have attendant care through the behavioral health rehabilitative services, but not for attendant. There's attendant care also for HCBS services or home and community-based services. So we have something separate from that. We also have psychosocial rehabilitation staff for things like PRI for PR for an individual and PRI for a group. We do have a mobile crisis responder paraprofessional level that we have really tried to implement with our CCBHC program for mobile crisis response teams to have a peer on that team, or maybe 2 peers as well. We also have things like residential support workers and community-based support staff. So here's kind of our summary. I won't go through all of this, but we do share some of the role within the Kansas system, and sometimes they can get confusing. So I think this is a good meeting to have. But we do certify some peer-based paraprofessionals for some services that I mentioned. We work with the BSRB on understanding more about how they license their counselors or addiction counselors. We do feel at KDADS that our paraprofessionals are essential to mental health and substance use disorder system, and also just finding a pipeline for them to be successful and continuing to encourage folks to go into that line of work, because we're definitely needing them. And I think, David, so you said 11:50, so it leaves us about 7 minutes for questions I can try to answer if that works.
That sounds great. And Drew, I appreciate again that you stepped in today. I hope that Shannon gets well as soon as possible. But thank you for covering that information. I think, in the efforts today, it's really kind of been to bring everybody together to see if we can educate everyone similarly, to make sure that we're all aware of the different options that are existing on the table. If we need to make changes, that's definitely something that we can talk about and should talk about. But if there's something that already exists, there's no reason to recreate the wheel, basically. It's kind of the thought process. And so, but I think one of the points of conversation has been, the ability to work, but also sort of the reimbursement piece. And I don't know if you're able to talk to the reimbursement for some of those services that are being provided by the paraprofessionals, but I was curious if you're aware of that. If you could comment as far as how some of those, if they could, potentially fill needs in terms of the reimbursement for those services.
So yeah, that's a fair question. So I think when we look, and this was kind of riddled within the presentation, but when we look specifically about where individuals are employed at licensed facilities for the state of Kansas, I think that makes a difference on reimbursement. So when you look at let's just say a substance use disorder provider or an entity providing that's licensed by the state of Kansas, providing peer services. That's something that we mentioned before. If you look at we have all those rates, we can get those rates that are in the Kansas Medical Assistance Provider Manual, the KMAP manual. Those rates are going to look different depending upon who the provider is, right? So if you are a substance use disorder clinic or another clinic providing behavioral health services, and that's allowable, right? You are going to be reimbursed at a fee for your service, and those rates are outlined. I think for peer support, we're in the average among the states. I think it's billed on a 15-minute basis. And so, and I want to say that's, I don't know, maybe $16 to $18. So, so not on the lower end of that, but not on the higher end as well. But so if Drew goes into a SUD clinic and gets peer support services for an hour, right, you're looking at somewhere between $64 for that service, and for the resource for that. If you go into a certified community behavioral health clinic, that rate changes because they are measured on a cost-based reimbursement. So they get essentially it's modeled as a per diem almost for providing those services. Now, a CCBHC is required to provide more services and has enhanced requirements and criteria for meeting that certification, but it is structured differently for how somebody would be reimbursed. Just a very, very historical model would be how the federally qualified health centers are reimbursed for their services and for their staff. They operate on a prospective payment system for most of their services, and they're on a cost-based rate. So it kind of probably depends, David, when we ask those questions, what licensed facilities we're looking at for what services are being provided. And then I think that you could do some sort of crosswalk on that, but it really just depends on where an individual is employed, whether that's case management services, therapies, peer services, et cetera, because it could be reimbursed differently. And then, of course, you talk about outside of Medicaid, right? That looks a little bit differently if you're talking about other federal funding sources like block grant dollars that get infused into the system or other state general contracts. Obviously, that's pertinent to the contractual arrangement, but it could look differently there too, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, it's complex for sure. But that's a lot of good information and definitely things to be aware of. Because when we talk about funding streams, sometimes we refocus a lot on the state's Medicaid plan. But as you mentioned, outside of the state plan, there's also, private insurance sometimes for different services.
Yep.
There's federal dollars. There's a few different other funding sources potentially. So, but thank you for the information for sure. That was a lot of good information. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for Drew?
Yeah, so Drew, I guess I'm wondering about just those levels of care that you talked about, attendant care and the behavioral health tech. So I'm thinking back again, we're kind of talking about trying to provide workforce support on the S2D side. The attendant care back in the day, I remember being in bachelor's level college. I was an attendant care provider on the mental health side. Two questions. What are the requirements for attendant care? Like, what are the specific kind of, and is that maybe equating to kind of what we're thinking on the SUD side, and is it available to those that are providing services under SUD, or like say the attendant care first?
So Christina, I can follow up with the requirements. I don't have those off the top of my head as far as what if there's anything and to your second question, kind of leading into that, I can probably do a crosswalk as to what would be allowable. So attendant care, essentially, as far as I can understand in our state plan, it's called an STC, like a special terms and condition services that we have added to our skinny Medicaid program, skinny Medicaid waiver, essentially. So there may just be some other information in that I would share as far as the allowability goes, but I can follow up and bring that back, and I think that would lead into your second question on how that lines out with other types of certifications or other avenues for what we have out there. And I missed your question about did you say something about the behavioral health tech? I'm sorry.
Well, that was I hadn't asked that question. So I do
Okay.
think, Drew, that it's jarring my brain a little here that, even what we've been talking about, Aaron, what you had presented and what we've been talking about as far as that was a question I had as far as it being a student or in training, really looking at this as a kind of a different service that these individuals could be providing. And would that make sense to have something equitable? When we talk about what can be provided, I spent time, I provided support, I did psychoeducation, like all these things that we've been talking about under that attendant care. Which also would give people kind of introduction to the field, all kind of everything that we've been talking about. I am curious, Drew, on the idea of that behavioral health tech. Could you speak more to what that means, or what that would be entailing? I know at one point, Charlie and I had been talking about, again, this idea of that more blended approach, integrated approach to individuals being able to provide services that can kind of fall into multiple roles in different service delivery areas. So do you have more information on the VHT, what that would be, and what that's kind of the thought around that is?
Yes, I do. If I can plead that I get a more robust summary document and send that, I would. Essentially, we took a lot from the LMHT and really tried to apply that for the community to be more robust. And what WSU was helping us with was compacting the curriculum requirements and some of the other requirements for the certification itself. But so it's meant to be a very robust tech position. It's also meant to be as entry level as it could be from folks that are at the end of their high school education, especially if they are like, hey, we don't necessarily want to go to college immediately to be a psychologist. To your point, we might just want to get a feel for the services to see if this is, or we don't want to be a social worker or this, that, and the other. Can we have an off ramp to still make some sort of money in the interim and figure out if this is what we want to do, right? And we wanted that to comport with not too many barriers for them to be able to do that. So I hope that makes sense in the general term, the idea behind it. But I know that we have at least a one pager with full of the the documentation and information that you're asking. I just didn't bring that today. So I can follow up with that if that's all right, Christina.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. And I think Drew, this gets to what David was saying, like not recreating something that's maybe already in the works of being created and that
Exactly.
doesn't fill that
Yeah.
role and really address the workforce issues that we're talking about in that capacity and not putting additional role scope of practice, maybe, where it makes sense. So yes, that'd
And
be great.
confusion. Yeah, that's kind of what I heard. That's what I think that's what happens when you have so many agencies doing great work. It's just sometimes hard to synchronize on all of that to make sure everybody's aware of it. So I agree with you. This is good to make sure we're all understanding what's out there.
Well, I see a question from Andy Martin with the Board of Nursing.
Yes, thank you. I just want to applaud you for convening this meeting, Jill and David. I want to put a pin in what Drew just said in terms of the value of this interagency collaboration and how difficult this work is. In our position from the Board of Nursing, we're very open to continuing these conversations. And if there's anything Janelle and I can do to help that, we want to do what's right for the best care of the people of Kansas. I'll just go ahead and go on record as a person with mental health challenges. The more we can get peer support people involved in this work, the better. In my belief in that. So there's just all kinds of win-win-wins. And I will shut up now because you want to have your other conversations, but let me know if there's anything we can do to help.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Any other questions from advisory committee members or other attendees for the representative from KDADS? Jill, I know time is short. We had an ambitious agenda, and I wish we had one more hour today. As an option, what I would propose, while I hate for us to schedule another meeting, I feel like if we had one more hour after everyone had a chance to digest all the information that was presented today, I feel like maybe members would be able to circle back around and consider things like recommendations. But what would your thoughts be on something like that?
Well, guess I would solicit the opinion of advisory committee members of whether they have the time and the bandwidth this summer to schedule another meeting to discuss this further.
I think it'd be helpful, Jill, and I do think getting that information from Drew from KDADS again about defining that attendant care and that BHT, I think that's going to be really important in, again, this discussion. So I can only speak for myself, but I'd be very, very interested in doing that. I think this is important. I mean, I appreciate Acadia bringing this forward and getting this discussion, and maybe there's a way to find, again, some, I don't know, it's a compromise or just an option that may help to address this in Kansas and provide some of that workforce that we're looking for.
Okay, I see a number of thumbs up that are floating from the bottom of my screen. Denise?
Yeah, quick question for timeline. Do we have to make sure that we have whatever our recommendations are ready for the legislature by July 31st?
So as the sort of the dominoes that would be falling, I think this committee would want to bring a recommendation to the board for the board's meeting on July 20th. So what I was thinking was, if the committee's open to it, trying to schedule a meeting that would be about half the normal length of a meeting time, so 1 hour instead of 2. But finding a time between now and the board's meeting on July 20th, so sometime over the next month, where the advisory committee can come back, and then the goal would be to have sort of something from the meeting that could be brought to the full board meeting at July 20th. So that's kind of what I had in my mind.
David, are you able to send out a poll to see people's availability?
Yeah, I'd be happy to put out a poll with some date options, and then people could note any conflicts. And we will look for, the most attendees as possible, and knowing that, some people may have conflicts since we're scheduling this a little bit earlier than we would normally schedule our normal meetings. But I'm happy to do that to make sure that we can meet before the board meeting on July 20th.
Do you feel like we need to take a vote, or is consensus good enough for this?
I feel like consensus is good, if it's the will of the body.
It seems like consensus has been reached.
And I know we have other stakeholders here. I will do my best to reach out to all of you as well, so you can attend if you are able to do so and observe. But concerning those of you that volunteered your time to bring information to the table today, do you understand kind of what we're looking for in terms of our next meeting as an advisory committee? How does this all sound to all of you? I feel like there's been a lot of really good discussions. A lot of good information was provided. We really want to continue to work on this, and we don't want to, I feel like we took a big step forward today. I feel like if we could all get together at once more time before the board meeting, I feel like we could have something really productive. So.
I agree. Okay, it seems like we're out of time. Does that make sense to adjourn the meeting, David?
I think that would be fine.
Okay. Because we have run out of time because of discussion today, the next agenda item would be adjourning the meeting. If I can get a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll move to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
Okay. There has been a motion that has been seconded. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. I truly appreciate everyone's time, effort, thought, questions today, and I look forward to seeing you soon to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.